Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a new commander from Final Fantasy, Jenova Ancient Calamity. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel and no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks to being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You could also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and some emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Jenova is a 1/5 alien for 2 generic, 1 black and 1 green. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a number of +1/+1 counters on another creature you control equal to Jenova's power, and it becomes a mutant. Why this seemingly random creature type? Well, Final Fantasy VII lore aside, she has a triggered ability that draws you cards whenever a mutant you control dies. Granted, it has to be during your turn, but you get to draw cards equal to its power. Power that can be massively increased thanks to the deck's black-green color identity. While you can 100% build Jenova as a mutant typo commander, given that there are now plenty of mutants and changelings in this color identity combination, keep in mind that Jenova also indefinitely turns one of your creatures into a mutant, so you don't really need to put too many mutants in the deck. That being said, I did include a bunch of them, which I'll show later. For now, let's look at how we can draw critical levels of cards by pumping up the mutant that dies during our turn. Llanowar Reborn, Opal Palace, and Oran Reef the Vastwood are more ways of adding +1/+1 counters on our creatures, all without taking up slots in the deck for being lands. The first one can sort of only do it once since it's graphed 1, and the last one is limited to just green creatures that enter that turn. But they're still good enough for being free includes. The Palace can only be used for Jenova, but we care about her power anyways, so it's kind of amazing here. Anduril, Narso, Reforged, Sphere Grid, and Emissary Green all put +1/+1 counters dependent on combat. Anduril is absolutely insane since it'll put the counter on each creature you control, but if you have the City's Blessing, it's 2 instead, and it's so easy to get the City's Blessing here. The grid also gives creatures we control reach and trample if they had a +1/+1 counter on them, which is cake here. The Emissary can get us either treasure or +1/+1 counters. Opponents aren't going to want to do either, but I've found that Profit tends to get the most votes, getting us a ton of treasures, so we can just vote for security in order to secure those +1/+1 counters. Necropolis Region and Quilled Great Worm also depend on combat, but these are absolutely brutal. They put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the amount of combat damage dealt. If a big creature already went through, they'll get even bigger, potentially drawing us a ton of cards when we sacrifice them. Combined with Sphere Grid giving them trample, and things get out of hand very quickly. Canopy Gargantuan and Loyal Guardian give +1/+1 counters to our entire army without having to attack with anything. Their triggers happen at the beginning of upkeep and combat respectively. The Gargantuan is even more brutal since it's not just one counter, but a counter equal to the creature's toughness. This drastically increases how big our creatures are, and you know that steep casting cost is nothing to a green deck. Vigor is perhaps the best one, although seemingly non-bowing with our commander. Instead of taking any damage, it's turned into +1/+1 counters instead. Our other creatures won't be dying in combat or from Blasphemous Act, but they're going to be massive when blocked or blocking, and then we can sacrifice them if need be to draw into a massive amount of cards. Ozolith the Shattered Spire can also put +1/+1 counters, but it's too slow here for that function. In any case, it's more of a bonus. It's here because it's a cheap way to cast, incrementing how many +1/+1 counters are placed on our creatures. Getting an extra counter each time is something to scoff at, especially with effects that only put 1 on their own. Combined with proliferate effects like those found on Karn's Bastion and Atomize, and you really have some fun. The land doesn't even take up a slot on the deck, and Atomize is instant speed interaction, which the deck needs anyways. And it's not even necessarily synergistic, since you can cast it even if nothing had any counters on it, making it an integral part of the interaction package of the deck, along with cards like Assassin's Trophy and Beast Within for single target removal, Windgrace's Judgment and Casualties of War for multiple single target removal, and Damnation for the board wipe. Damnation especially is an amazing board wipe here, setting everyone back while we draw into an absolute ton of cards if we had large enough mutants getting destroyed during our turn. Going back to counter incrementing, Bristly Bill, Spine Sower, Court of Garenbrig, and Colonian Hydra do so in spades by doubling the +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Not only that, but the first 2 also put +1/+1 counters on our creatures, helping them out even further. The Court also gives us the Monarch, which we can very easily defend. The Hydra doesn't put any counters like the first two, but it puts counters on itself when entering, which means it can grow massively afterwards. We can also move counters around thanks to cards like Nesting Grounds. It doesn't take up a slot on the deck and can be used to move +1/+1 counters around. I tend to use this to put counters onto Jenova, since it can't put any on itself with its ability, and then it'll be bigger to pump the next creature. The Ozolith and Rayhan, last of the Abzan, are absolutely necessary in this deck. Keep in mind that we want our pumped up mutants to die during our turn in order to draw a ton of cards, but there's no need to let those counters go to waste. That's where these come in. Bonus points for putting those counters onto Jenova afterwards. Forgotten Ancient could get quite massive in a multiplayer environment, especially since it counts the spells you cast as well. Just don't forget to put its counters onto Jenova when its trigger resolves, or maybe some other mutant to make it even bigger. Besides counters, we can just outright massively pump our creatures with cards like Unnatural Growth and Zopandrel Hunger Dominus. These cards absolutely go nuts here, outright doubling our creature's power and toughness. Not only that, but Zopandrel has a sacrifice outlet, allowing us to sacrifice 2 creatures, all while making it indestructible. Glorious. Berserk also does something similar but at instant speed and to a single creature. However, it gives a delayed destruction effect on the creature, which also benefits us, since we would prefer our mutants die during our turn for the value. The deck is still running other value pieces like Concave Shadowcat, which also kills 2 birds with 1 stone. We can sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it also has a trigger where we draw a card whenever a creature dies with a +1/+1 counter on it. This card does it all here. It should be noted that the deck is still running other prime sacrifice outlets like Grim Backwoods, High Market, Hostel, Lassatip Quarry, Miranda Moaning Well, and Phyrexian Tower, which don't really take up a slot. And you might be saying, but Kirby, so many colorless mana utility lands. Well, keep in mind that it's a 2-card deck, and not just any colors, but colors that can make the most of Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth and Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. With both in play, all your lands are essentially bayous, especially those utility lands that only tap for colorless. Like for instance, Reliquary Tower. With the amount of cards this deck is drawing into at any given time, you know I had to include this. And not just the land that doesn't take up a slot in the deck, but Thought Vessel and Decanter of Endless Water too. At the very least, they're still mana rocks, along with Soul Ring being the only other one in the deck. Granted, the deck is green, so we don't really need any other mana rocks in it, but we'll see the mana acceleration pieces in the deck soon enough. In any case, going back to sacrifice outlets, Altar of Dementia, Oshna's Altar, and Phyrexian Altar are free to activate, but not free to run since you still gotta pay the mana to cast them. You can still activate these at instant speed if necessary, but doing so within your turn with mutants helps you draw a ton of cards. Altar of Dementia does have the potential of milling out that Pillow Fort and or Stacks player you can't swing into, so it does provide some use beyond a free sacrifice outlet. Fortunately, Inspiring Call and Armorcraft Judge help us draw a ton of cards without having to sacrifice our creatures though. As a bonus, Inspiring Call will also give our creatures indestructible until end of turn, as long as they have a +1/+1 counter on them. We can still also protect our creatures with Commander's Plate, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, and Mithril Coat. Don't worry, not everything has to be super synergistic here, although that can definitely help. The deck isn't super 100% dependent on the commander, which is a huge plus, allowing us to use these equipment on other key creatures if needed. Spikeweaver is amazing synergistic protection though, making the most of all the +1/+1 counter strategies in the deck. So long as it has any +1/+1 counters on it, we can pay 1 and remove it to Fog. This is super useful against Horde decks or any other deck that's out aggroing us. And with plenty of ways to put +1/+1 counters on it, we can Fog for days. As for the actual mutants in the deck, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there are enough to go full typal with Jenova. However, I felt that was too much since Jenova can already turn creatures into mutants. That being said, I did run the best ones I found for the deck. A Baron, Rampaging Yao-Guai, Nantuko Vigilante, and Alpha Deathclaw are amazing because they have built-in interaction. The Nantuko needs to be morphed first, but that's fine because when it comes time to use it, it's a special action, so it doesn't use the stack, meaning we can even bypass split-second spells. A Baron and Yao-Guai entering with X +1/+1 counters is already glorious enough as it is, but both having ways of getting rid of multiple artifacts and or enchantments makes them 100% worth including. Same with the Deathclaw. It might cost a whopping 6 mana to cast, but it's still a 6/6 with Trample and Menace when sticking around after blowing up any permanent. If that weren't enough, you can make it monstrous giving it +1/+1 counters, which the deck loves. Infesting Radroach and Shambling Seath are also amazing mutants for the deck. This is because they have self-recovering effects built in. If the cockroach is sufficiently big, it can give massive amounts of rad counters to the defending player, providing a source of mill and life loss. So it might even be possible to win with mill thanks to this bug and Altar of Dimension. Then when an opponent mills a non-land card, it returns to your hand from the graveyard. Absolutely busted. The Seath returns directly to the battlefield, but only when you pay 1 black when casting a non-creature spell. Fortunately, that's not that big of a hoop to jump through. Vincent Valentine might not be a printed mutant, but that's not an issue for Jenova. This edgelord gets so many +1/+1 counters in a game of Commander that he becomes very dangerous quite quickly. If that weren't enough, when you finally attack with him, he transforms, becoming even better for the deck. And not just because he has Trample and Lifelink, but whenever he dies, he returns tapped to the battlefield. This is such an amazing creature to turn into a mutant with Jenova. Going back to the notion of rad counters, Feral Ghoul also gives a ton of them, but only when it dies. However, it does so to each opponent, and it dying is something we want happening anyways, especially with how big it gets. Creatures we control dying give it +1/+1 counters, which is a great bonus. Watchful Rad Stag makes it sure that we always have sacrifice fodder. Each time it evolves, it copies itself. With only 2 power and 2 toughness, that will happen quite often. We can always then sacrifice the biggest one once it reaches a point where it can't really evolve any further. Speaking of evolving, Evolution Witness can help with sacrifice fodder by recovering permanents. In this case, creatures we've been sacrificing during our turn. Each time it gets a +1/+1 counter on it, we can recover a permanent. Not only is this amazing for those mutants, but for other permanents opponents got rid of. It's amazing even with just recovering any of the deck's 7 fetch lands. With so many ways of putting +1/+1 counters on creatures, this thing does so much work here. Getting this early on with a fetch land and counter source will have us never miss a land drop, especially since the deck is running Haunted Mire, Overgrown Tomb, Underground Mortuary, and Woodland Chasm, plus 5 of each snow-covered basic land, so we'll always have something to fetch for. Even if not with the Witness, but with my favorite land ramp package of Farseek, Nature's Lure, 3 Visits into the North, and Rampant Growth. The point is that Evolution Witness is an amazing card here regardless if it were a mutant or not, but it being a mutant is simply a massive bonus. Unforgiving One might not be a mutant in print, but it's another amazing recovery effect. Whenever it attacks, we can reanimate one of our creatures. The only drawback is that it can't cost more than the number of modified creatures we control, but that shouldn't be an issue because we expect all or most of our creatures to be carrying a +1/+1 counter anyways. Returning to my list of amazing mutants, the deck is running Hancock Ghoulish Mayor and Chameleon Colossus. Hancock pumps all of our zombies and mutants per his +1/+1 counters. So all we really have to do is just put our +1/+1 counters on him if it came down to it. Not only that, but he has Undying. So if he didn't have any, we can sacrifice him in a jam and he'll just return with 1. So good. The Colossus is a shapeshifter, but since it has Changeling, it's obviously a mutant. Being able to double its power and toughness at instant speed for just 4 mana is absolutely insane, even if it doesn't have built-in evasion. As a bonus, it has protection from black, so there is a possibility of it being unblockable if an opponent only had black creatures. But pumping this up before sacrificing is so satisfying. Vegetation Abomination is also great because it has a built-in sacrifice outlet. It might seem weird including this odd common in a list running so many amazing mutants, but it does have Death Touch, making opponents wary of either blocking it or swinging into us. Then, if it has enough power, we could just tap it and sacrifice it to draw into a ton of cards. The life we gain is just a bonus, but having a built-in sacrifice effect means we could do so much with it, especially if we had something like Evolution Witness in play, helping us get it back time and time again. Speaking of getting +1/+1 counters, Agent Frank Horrigan is absolutely in here. Including Vegetation Abomination in the deck might have come from left field, but definitely not this guy. What an amazing card for the deck. An 8/6 Trampler that's indestructible if it attacked is so busted, and that's without any pumps. Not only that, but when he attacks we proliferate twice. Absolute madness. Last but not least is Spore Pack Troll. Maybe we're in a situation where we don't want our creatures dying. Well, for just 2 mana we can regenerate them. This mutant does so much work here. We can block for days, or if facing against red decks, you can laugh at their Blasphemous Act, so long as you held up enough mana, of course. The final way to make the best use of our mutants is mana acceleration. Thanks to Jenova, we have card advantage in the command zone, but being a black-green deck, you know we can speed along a game well past our opponents. Kadama of the West Tree helps us ramp super hard because it's once per modified creature and not opponent hit. So if we hit any combination of opponents with a total of, for example, 5 modified creatures, we just ramped 5 basic lands tapped onto the battlefield. Not only that, but it gives our modified creatures trample. That alone could just win us the game on the spot. Jiang Yangu, Wildcrafter, and Wishkar Pima Renegade also make use of our +1/+1 carrying creatures by letting us tap them for mana. Jiang is the only planeswalker in the deck, but we should be able to protect him no problem. As a bonus, both of these cards also add +1/+1 counters, further synergizing with the deck. Crystalline Crawler can give us amazing bursts of mana all at once if it had the +1/+1 counters for us to do so. With so many ways of adding them, multiplying them, proliferating them, etc., we can power out expensive spells even early on. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Jenova Ancient Calamity. Regardless of whether you build it super into Mutants or not, the fact remains that this is an incredibly powerful commander. Not only do you have a way of pumping creatures, but massive card advantage right in the command zone. And we all know there's nothing better in a game of Commander than having most of your library in your hand. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Man at Kirby, and happy brewing.